Rocky Adams. Senator Chambers Armstrong. Senator Herron. Senator Maiden. Senator Mays Bledsoe. Senator McDaniel. Senator Mills. Senator Rawlings. Senator Tishner. Senator Elkins. Chair Nemus.
Present. Please remember to silence your cell phones during the meeting. For those in the room, please remember to turn your microphones when speaking before the committee and to record your votes. I'd like to recognize the newly elected members to the committee: Senator Herron, Senator Maiden, Senator Rawlings, and recognize new member to the committee, Senator Tishner, and recognize returning members to the committee, Senator Adams, and recognize our vice chair, Senator Elkins. Does anyone have any guests that they want to recognize? First item on the agenda is Senate Bill 126, sponsored by Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I know you need no introduction, but please state your name for the record and begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris McDaniel, State Senator for the 23rd Senate District, and I appreciate your and the members of this committee's indulgence in hearing this measure today. Mr. Chairman, there is a committee substitute to this measure. Based off of your pleasure, could that possibly be
Do you
distributed?
have a motion to accept the second? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? We don't need a roll call, do we? The committee sub has been adopted. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 126 is an item that has been in front of this committee since 2020. Almost always received unanimous or nearly unanimous approval. The committee substitute makes a slight change to this, and I'll talk about that in a quick second. But I'll start by reading a piece of a letter that illustrates the importance of this measure. And this young lady was with us before, which is why I don't mind to read this, and this is in the record previously. Senator McDaniel, my name is Chloe Randall. I'm here today in hopes that we can work together to change the law where child rapists are not able to be pardoned. This means a lot to me, as I was raped when I was 12 years old. My rapist is one of the 8,993 registered sex offenders in Kentucky. My predator was 28 years old at that time. He pretended to be 17, and after 3 long years of the trial process and all the convictions, my predator received a total of 75 years in prison. The predator, who was eligible for parole, for pardon, which he received, which will forever terrify young women like this, amongst many others. I also have recounted to this committee on numerous occasions the young woman who was a waitress at a restaurant. Many of you will recall, I had the manager of that restaurant down with me last year, because after she was kidnapped in Covington, Kentucky, driven around the area for 2 weeks and repeatedly raped in the back of a car, murdered with her body thrown in a field to be found infested with all the creatures that accompany the decay of human remains, her murderer had a pardon or commutation and was ultimately eligible for parole last year. Mercifully, because of the intervention of that same manager, his parole was revoked. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. But these are the things that happen when an executive, in their sole discretion, can pardon people for whatever crimes they want. And frankly, we've seen it again recently with the departing president. And while we cannot control federally what happens, we saw people who have murdered FBI agents walk free. We've seen a judge who was sentencing juveniles as part of an elaborate scheme to juvenile detention in private prisons walk free. And the person who grants them their freedom stands to account to no one. Senate Bill 126 hopes to remedy that. The change in Senate Bill 126 is that in previous years, we have eliminated the power to pardon 30 days before a gubernatorial election and then a time from the election until the swearing in. We've lengthened the time on the front end from 30 days to 60 days with input from other members in the other chamber, basically because since the time we started doing this, we now have early voting. And sometimes the early voters may not have enough time to know with a mere 30 days, so we've extended it to 60. So what this measure does is a very common sense measure. It forces the executive or the party of the executive to stand in front of the voters and account for the actions that they take. The power to pardon still exists for 3 years and 9 months out of every gubernatorial term. This is simply a common sense measure to put in front of the voters of the Commonwealth a change to the Constitution to force accountability into a process. The justice system, while good and while one of the finest in the world, is not perfect. But the justice system involves a victim who's willing to come forward, a police officer who's willing to arrest, a prosecutor who's willing to go in front of a grand jury who's willing to indict, a prosecutor who takes it to trial, a judge, a jury, an appellate judge, and sometimes the Supreme Court of the land. We're talking dozens, if not hundreds of people involved in the process that ultimately hands down the sentence that society deems to be just. But the power to pardon, especially the power to pardon without an accountability mechanism, allows one person in the waning days of an administration to do things that the rest of society has deemed to be unacceptable, things that should cost people their freedom. And that system should not be allowed to be short-circuited without the input of the voters of the Commonwealth. And Mr. Chairman, that is what Senate Bill 126 aims to do.
Thank you, Senator. Is there any discussion? Senator Herron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill forward. Listening before I came in, I didn't know how I was going to vote, and I still am and trying to figure that out. And I think that some of the things at which you spoke about does make sense as it relates to how do we make sure that if individuals are given pardons, that executive branch is held accountable for those pardons, whether people think they should have pardons or not. I think that my concern is having something like this, would it then create a chilling effect or decrease the amount of pardons? I have worked with folks who have been impacted by our criminal legal system, and I do know some people who have gone through the pardon process who have been out of incarceration, have do some wonderful things in the community. As a senator, I'm actually going to be having some workshops in my district because I've gotten so many people asking me, how do I go through the pardon process? So I will be doing a workshop in April for Second Chance Month to teach people about that process. Obviously, I don't have the power to determine who gets the pardon, but to show people how you can do that and petition for that. Can you just talk a little bit more about the time period, why you chose like the specific time period in which you did for this bill?
Sure, absolutely. And Senator, the work you do is well known and respected. And the fact is, you talk about a process, right, which is exactly what this is meant to be. And there are wonderful members of our society who've done something ill-advised, illegal, at some point in their life, who have done their time, who have paid their debt to society, and who have successfully re-entered and been wonderful citizens. And this is in no way an attempt to preclude that. This is about the process of justice and the means by which to ensure that process is not short-circuited without the ability of recourse to the voters. To your question directly, like a good politician, I said what I wanted to say first. Now we'll answer your question, Senator. But to your question directly, the intent was, what is a reasonable amount of time for voters to be aware of actions taken by the executive? Originally, I had thought that 30 days was an appropriate amount. The reason for the lengthening to 60 was more and more people are voting early, or by means other than going to a ballot box on election day necessarily. And we felt that the information was important. I always like to err on the side of the more information that can be pushed to the voters about the decisions they have to make, the better. And so it was just a decision as to what I felt was reasonable in the amount of time for the information to be disseminated in the public square for voters to make an informed decision.
Motion on the bill.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Chambers Armstrong.
Yes.
Senator Elkins.
Aye.
Senator Herron.
I'm going to pass today, but I would like to have further conversations with you just to kind of Thank you.
Senator Maiden.
Yes.
Senator Mays Blesso.
Yes.
Senator McDaniel.
Cast my vote and explain, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By way of explanation, one thing I did fail to touch on is this is obviously an amendment to the Constitution, so it would have to pass both chambers with a constitutional supermajority and then be placed on the ballot in front of the voters in 2026. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
He did.
Okay, thank you. Senator Mills.
Aye.
Senator Rawlings.
Yes.
Senator Tishner.
Aye.
Chair Nemus.
Aye. Senate Bill 126, as adopted by the committee substitute, passes with favorable expression.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
The last item on the agenda is Senate Bill 37, sponsored by Senator Elkins.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I apologize for the noise. The desk fell apart underneath my chair here during the testimony.
We were ignoring that.
Thought I fell asleep and fell out of the chair.
Senator Elkins, if you'll state your name and proceed.
So I'm State Senator Greg Elkins, representing the 28th District. And I thank you. I want to
Now,
thank.
before we get started, we have a committee sub. Is there a motion to accept the committee? Second? Second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The committee sub has been adopted.
So this Senate Bill 37 intends to amend KRS 72.450 when dealing with the indigent burials. Currently, our fiscal courts or coroners or whoever bears the responsibility of paying for the indigent burials in our communities only has the option now, or doesn't have an option at all. They must bury the indigent person. And so this bill gives them the option to cremate that person. And the Senate Committee sub also requires the fiscal court or the person who bears the burden of payment to consult with the coroner in the county before making that decision whether to cremate or to bury. The bill is a local control issue. One other thing I should mention, I have been working with Rabbi Littman, who is behind me, to find a way to communicate to these fiscal courts and coroners that if the indigent is Jewish, that he would be happy to take up those that remains and be responsible for them as well. So we're working on doing something, whether it's a part of this bill or something later. It's just something I want to bring awareness to. I think I said that correctly, Rabbi. So I just wanted you guys to know that. And other than that, I don't have anything further. I'll be glad to take some questions if you have any.
Senator Tishner?
Thank you, Senator. So in section 1, a bona fide attempt to notify spouse or next of kin, is there a length of time associated with that?
I don't think there's a length of time. I do think that most coroners understand the responsibility of trying to find next of kin, and I think they all do their very best to find someone because they would rather find someone to take responsibility of that body than to have to do it themselves.
I often just think of runaways, people who've been disconnected for long periods of time from relatives, and how complicated that could be to try and locate. And obviously we'd want to make sure they have the time to do their research and notify those people before that type of a decision would be made, if it would be against their wishes.
There are actually coroners across the state that have been holding bodies for over a year trying to locate next of kin. So if they think it's possible, they generally continue to look.
Now, this bill
Thank you.
doesn't change the policy now on how they do that or the length of time. Now, if you were thinking about putting a floor amendment, which I know you are, on something maybe the rabbi wants, and some of the coroners have spoken about that there's other problems with when they do find a family and they won't take action, how long do they have to keep the body? As we discussed before, you might want to do a floor amendment, and you might want to put particular things in that. But this bill doesn't address that. It doesn't change what's going on now.
And I would add to that, Mr. Chairman, if I may, we do have also funeral home directors that have remains, particularly cremated remains, that they've been holding for upwards of 10 years because the family members won't take responsibility for them, don't want them, or they can't find someone. And so we have, the chairman and I have talked about a floor amendment that may put some time frame on that to where that could, once it goes past 6 months or a year, they could be classified as an indigent as well, and then that would allow the funeral home directors to do something with those remains.
Thank you, Senator. We have someone. Rabbi, did you want to speak?
Just briefly, Rabbi Shlomo Litvin, Chairman, Kentucky Jewish Council. Thank you for having me today. The Senator already covered what I discussed with him. I, number one, want to thank the Senator for taking the time to hear our community's concerns and working to address it. One concern our community has is, as the Bible says, from dust to dust you shall return. Jewish community puts a massive premium on being buried. The idea of a Jewish body being cremated is a horror to the Jewish community and brings echoes of the forced cremations in the Holocaust. So the Jewish community has offered, particularly through Chabad, that if there is a Jewish indigent who passes away, that they will take responsibility for that cost, acknowledging the massive cost that puts on coroners to have them buried in a Jewish cemetery in the Jewish traditions. We're working to either get it in this bill or to communicate that in another way, but I just want to thank the Senator for taking the time to address our community's concerns.
Thank you. What's that? Okay. I see no other discussion. There's a motion on the bill. All right, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Chambers Armstrong. Senator Elkins.
Aye.
Senator Herron.
Yes.
Senator Maiden.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to explain my vote.
Yes.
First of all, to my colleague, Mr. Elkins, I came down to see you and you were in a Transportation Committee meeting, and I was yesterday willing to co-sponsor this bill because I really thought it was something that could help not only the counties but the funeral folks. And after I got out of session and literally had a phone call from every funeral director in my district, we're having an issue with it. I guess this is where the fun stops of being a legislator. Greg's one of my good friends, and I support him 100%. But and I support this bill, but my constituents say no. So Mr. Elkins, I apologize to you for that, but I'm going to have to vote no for that reason.
Senator Mays Bledsoe. Aye. Senator McDaniel.
Aye.
Senator Mills.
Aye.
Senator Rawlings.
Yes.
Senator Tishner.
I'm going to pass on this. Can I just make a few comments? We talked about this last session when this bill came up, and I'm just still not quite comfortable with this, considering family members might try to locate their loved one at some point and not be able to have a place of burial to visit. And so I'm just not quite comfortable with it, but I'm going to pass, and hopefully that doesn't hold it up to get out of the committee today.
Chair Nemus.
Aye. Senate Bill 17, as amended by committee substitute, passes with favorable expression.
Mr. Chairman,
Where'd that come from? Yes. Senator Adams.
I was hoping that before we adjourn, I might be able to cast an aye vote on Senate Bill 126.
That would be fine.
Thank you.
No other business before the committee. We are adjourned.
Okay, I'll need your signature. Right here.